On this day, in 1931, a South Brisbane gent was pretty certain he'd come up with a surefire home remedy for his ailments. Having done a bit of research, albeit remarkably scant, he was ready to throw caution to the wind and dish out a dose of newfangled therapy. However, his experiment wasn't going to turn out quite the way he'd intended. At the age of 49, Arthur Alexander Clugston had been suffering from stomach complaints for some considerable time, a malady that in 1930s Brisbane was usually attributed to the presence of a nervous disorder. Employed as a fitter with the tramway department, Arthur had enjoyed relatively good health up and into his mid-40s. However, as 50 crept closer, his health began to fail. Having undergone 3 operations in the 2 years leading up to 1931 without experiencing any noticeable improvement in his condition, Arthur began to seek out alternate therapies that might provide some relief for the ailments he'd been suffering. Asking around, an acquaintance recommended the invigorating healing potential of electrical therapy or electrotherapy, frequently advertised through the 1920s and 1930s as a magical cure-all. Buoyed with the hope that he may well have found a cure for his tummy troubles, Arthur was equally pleased when he stumbled across an article in the local newspaper confirming the benefits of electrotherapy. Whilst the reports of Arthur's experiment don't state the exact article upon which he'd stumbled, a search of local print media from early 1931 points us in the direction of a likely culprit. On the pages of the Daily Standard, printed on the 21st of April 1931, an editorial was published entitled The Way to Health number 582, Newer Forms of Treatment, Electrotherapy. A regular column in the Daily Standard, the series was supposedly penned by a well-known trained medical man who amusingly remained nameless and professed to provide advice on common ailments and hints for their treatment. As an opener, the offending piece stated, in conjunction with hydrotherapy, which I described briefly in my last talk, electrotherapy, or the treatment of disease by means of electricity, is used to diagnose and treat many types of nervous disorders. The effect of the current appears to be much the same as that of massage. The cells of the body are stimulated into higher activity, and at the same time a soothing effect is produced. And with that article, the scene was set for Arthur's luck to turn irreversibly south. Taking some rather large punts at how this so-called electrotherapy should work, Arthur went out and bought himself a large battery. Transporting it back to his house in Grattan Street off Ipswich Road in Woolloongabba, Arthur rigged up a makeshift device in order to begin his course of therapy. Unfortunately, after some messing about, Arthur found his mobile power supply dished out more of a whimper than the expected invigorating stream of massage-like healing. Realising he'd need to return to the drawing board and locate a stronger source of electricity, it wasn't long until Arthur devised yet another cunning plan to revamp his home therapy contraption. He'd tapped directly into the main power. In 1931, the concept of mains electricity was still relatively new, the majority of houses throughout southeast Brisbane having only been connected to the main supply for a little over 10 years, if that. Equally, despite his employment with the tramway department, which relied on the electricity supply to power their carriages in and around Brisbane, Arthur knew little if anything about electricity or how it actually functioned. But with a little experimentation, he thought, a redesign of his electrotherapy device shouldn't be too difficult. So, at 9:30 p.m. on the 1st of May, when dinner was done and his wife and 2 daughters were settling down for the night, Arthur announced that he was popping to the bathroom to have another shot at some electrotherapy. Taking an electrical lead, he proceeded to strip the majority of insulation from the internal wire before weaving the strand around the exposed bathroom water pipes and the bathtub. Filling the tub with a couple of inches of water, likely with the intention of combining a little hydrotherapy with his electricity, just like he'd read in the Daily Standard, Arthur plugged the other end of the electrical lead into a power point in the room adjoining the bathroom, sat down on the camp chair he'd placed next to the tub, popped his feet into the water, and finally grabbed a hold of the trailing end of electrical wire, and the house was immediately plunged into darkness. Hearing a large thump emanate from the bathroom as everything went dark, Arthur's daughter shouted out to her mother Maria that something was horribly amiss. Shouting out to Arthur in turn, without response, Maria grabbed a candle and made her way to the washroom in order to investigate, where she discovered poor old Arthur still seated alongside the bathtub, clutching the electrical wire. Also relatively oblivious to the dangers of electricity, Maria grabbed the wire with the intent of prying it from Arthur's hand, in turn being dealt a phenomenal shock that fortunately jolted her clear of her husband. With the source of the electricity traced to the lamp switch next door, the power was finally cut and the ambulance summoned. However, Arthur had unfortunately slipped away, despite the medical responders' best efforts to administer artificial respiration. A subsequent inquiry into Arthur's unusual and untimely demise would declare it was a very unfortunate accident brought about by a complete lack of knowledge regarding either electricity or medicine. Laid to rest within the grounds of South Brisbane Cemetery, Arthur would eventually be joined by his very lucky wife, who almost shared in his fate many years later at the enviable age of 102.